it's gonna be alright.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Try and Stupid, where I take a look at the wonderful world of LGBTQIA++ news, because stupidity is intersectional. So the first story that I want to talk about this week involves Posie Parker. Now, I'm sure a lot of my viewers will be aware of who she is, but for those of you who aren't, Parker is one of the most, if not the most, controversial activist within the gender-critical sphere. She doesn't identify as a feminist, however she does go to a lot of feminist events and talks about her views on the trans debate, which are considered generally quite hardline, and there are certainly views that she holds that I disagree with quite strongly. She first became in the public eye last year after police visited her because she said mean things online about the daughter of the Mermaid's founder. Again, I did a video about that at the time where I discussed that you can disagree with what Posie Parker says and that you can think it is indeed quite cruel what she says. However, she should be free to say what she believes, because this is how you get productive conversations. And last week she appeared on the TRIGGERnometry podcast hosted by Konstantin Kisin and Francis Foster. Now, both Francis and Konstantin have said that Parker is probably one of the most controversial guests that they've had on the channel. In fact, they pushed back on her more than they've pushed back on anyone else, because whilst they agreed with some things she said, there was quite a few things which they didn't agree with. Despite this, and despite the fact they was really getting quite a productive conversation, YouTube decided that this isn't on, and as a result the video was yeeted on the grounds that it was hate speech which incited violence or hatred. According to a TRIGGERnometry Twitter account, they said that the slogan of their show is that we don't pretend to be experts, we ask the experts. We're just two comedians who are trying to make sense of the world and educate ourselves on the key contested issues of the day. They mentioned that earlier this year they had India Willoughby on, a trans TV presenter in the UK, and then they go into a bit more detail about Posie Parker, who says trans women are not real women. They say, she said many things that made sense to us during the 1 hour interview and some which didn't and which we didn't agree with. We challenged her more than any guest in the 18-month history of our show. Today, YouTube took down the full interview on the grounds it is hate speech which incites hatred and or violence against protected groups. This was following a manual review. Our channel was given a warning. If we get 3 more, our channel will be deleted. The video was seen by about 35,000 people, the vast majority of whom criticised us for challenging Posie too much. Even our transgender guest, who is no fan of Posie Parker, agrees she has a right to speak. Now, thankfully, the video was reinstated following a backlash when this got covered by various outlets such as Spiked, and even Konstantin wrote for Quillette, explaining the whole bizarreness of this situation. Now, it's good that the video has come back and that people can actually watch it and come to their own conclusion as to whether Posie is right or wrong. There were things in the video that I personally disagreed with, but I think what the big concern here isn't so much what I disagreed with, but the fact that this got taken down in the first place. We're very used to the idea that disagreeing with the trans narrative is something which is considered almost immoral by the woke today, and Posie is someone who has certainly fallen foul of this on many occasions. For example, her Twitter account has been completely removed from her as well. I've watched this video and there is nothing in there which comes close to inciting hatred or violence at all. She words things quite strongly, she words things in a way which I think is unfair. That doesn't mean that it is violence, however. But really none of that should come as a surprise when you have, for example, articles by Riley Dennis talking about how misgendering is an act of violence. And of course, in the interview, Posie Parker talks about how she will never use a trans person's preferred pronouns no matter what the situation is. Something I can disagree with, but an act of violence? No, it isn't. it's a ridiculous stretch to say that not referring to someone in the way that they like is tantamount to beating, because ultimately we know what violence means. It's not having a disagreement. Just because you're removing the platform away from people you disagree with doesn't mean that idea is ever going to go away. All you're going to do is push it underground, and people will resent you more and more for making these actions to completely get rid of it. And the fact that this had to be removed by manual review means that there were indeed people flagging it because they just didn't like it. The whole idea that this was going to somehow encourage violence against people. And we always hear this narrative that, oh, it's the gender critical feminists who are the ones who are going to be inciting violence against us. They're the reasons why we get beaten on the street. When I discussed the Trans Day of Remembrance last week, I mentioned about how groups such as conservatives and gender critical feminists are usually blamed for violence against trans people, but where is the actual link that directly correlates to it? Do you really think that a bloke down the pub is going to go and assault some tranners because Posie Parker doesn't use our preferred pronouns? I somehow don't think that's going to happen. Now, this is concerning that platforms can be removed, and I think that the best way forward when it comes to just having this trans debate is to indeed have a full debate about it. I should note that I am going to be appearing on TRIGGERnometry at some point. I recorded with Constantine and Francis just the other day. That will be up at some point. I will let you all know when that will be. Now, the next story that I want to discuss involves a clip that seems to have been going a little bit viral on Twitter, and it's something I've seen a lot of people sharing. And I just wanted to discuss the story because it's one where I'm a little bit confused as to what the purpose of this really is. Transgender students win unrestricted locker room access in Palatine, Schaumburg high schools. The Palatine Schaumburg High School District's 211 board on Thursday voted to give transgender students unrestricted access to locker rooms and restrooms. The vote was 5-2. The district superintendent said this policy doesn't mean anyone can just go into any locker room or restroom at any time. The policy requires a student and parents to have communication with a district and come up with a plan. School district superintendent Dan Cates said, "We believe this is now the time to move forward with this policy, that we would not plan to implement it until the start of the second semester in January." During the public comment period before the vote, one teen, who identified herself as a student in the district, expressed discomfort with unrestricted locker room access, saying, "I do not want to see a transgender student naked in the locker room. I do not want a transgender student to see me naked in a locker room." But another student said, "Anyone can use the changing rooms if they want to, but no one should be forced to. The district should be helping trans students, not putting more obstacles in front of them." For almost 4 years, trans students in the district have had to use a nurse's office or private stalls to change clothes.
Yeah, it passed. It passed.
And how does it make you feel?
Oh, I'm ecstatic.
I'm sorry.
I feel uncomfortable that my privacy is being invaded. As I am a swimmer, I do change multiple times naked in front of the other students in the locker room, and I understand that the board has an obligation to all students, but I was hoping that they would go about this in a different way that would also accommodate students such as myself.
So one of those students who is clearly trans is overjoyed at the idea of being able to use their female changing rooms, whereas the female student in the video clearly doesn't look happy, to say the least. Now, I've seen a lot of reporting on, in particular, the latter student, where people have been saying, like, she's in tears and she's very close to tears. She's certainly emotional in the clip, but I don't think the hyperbole really helps. I think that she has valid concerns. You don't really need to butter it up any more than it already is. For me, I find this quite strange because puberty is a time in which teenagers are very self-conscious about their bodies. Not just trans teenagers, but female or male teenagers as well. Everyone feels a little bit awkward about it. So this is a time you're going to be very, very self-conscious, and especially if you're a trans person who at this point might not even have started a medical transition, or if they have, will be incredibly, it'll be very soon into it. now being in a changing room with lots of people who, you know, are biologically female, or if it's the other way around, biologically male. I find it a bit strange that someone would want to put themselves in that kind of position. As it mentioned in here, when you had the girl saying that, well, she doesn't want to see trans people and she doesn't want trans people to see her. I'm sure a lot of trans kids feel the same as well, in particular with people seeing them, or they don't want to be seen by other people. I could think of that being quite common. And so the original compromise was always use a different changing room. And I would say that would be the ideal situation here. None of them are going to have gone through surgery or have gone through extensive medical pathway just yet. So why is it so important to use the changing room? Bear in mind, we're not talking about bathrooms here. It's specifically talking about changing rooms. Now, the school does clarify that in order to be able to use the changing rooms, you would need to, it wouldn't be just a decision down to the students, it would involve their parents as well. Although they do say that anyone who has a problem with this can go and use their own bathroom. And it kind of reminds me of a South Park episode from a couple of years ago. So I find this quite an awkward push. I think that, especially as a teenager, when in a room with other teenagers, I don't think this is anything that has any kind of sexual connotation to it at all. I don't get that impression off anyone who's talked about it. But I do think that this isn't the best idea. I think that if you are a trans girl, teenager, are you really comfortable with being in a changing room where, okay, maybe if everyone isn't naked, but you're going to be in underwear, are they not going to see what's down there? Is that, like, do you not, like, you know, surely you wouldn't want people to notice that, and if you're in your underwear, it's probably going to be quite noticeable. Why don't you just get changed in a separate room? I think that would be fine. I don't think that this needs to be open to everyone, or at the very least on a case-by-case basis. The school's ruling is simply anyone who identifies in that way. Doesn't really give a ground line for how long a transition needs to have gone on for, or whether they need to be on any kind of medical treatment or anything like that. It could, based on the rules, it could literally be that little Timmy says that Timmy is now a female, and so doesn't, you know, has his female beard growing in. I know that's it, and so can use that changing room. And I know that's a ludicrous step. However, the rule does allow that. Technically, the rule does allow that. So, you know, there's something about this that seems a little bit off. I'll be completely honest. And whilst I certainly know that teenagers transitioning is controversial, and again, it is something that my opinion is always evolving on, there is something about this that I think that it would just be better if they just changed in their own area where they have privacy. After all, I think it's important for the trans person to have privacy here. But that's just me, I suppose. And the last story that I want to touch on this week involves a group known as Fair Cop. Now, they've been around for a couple of months, and the one which I haven't really talked about, however, now that the legal action is going ahead, it is something that I would just kind of like to discuss a little bit. Police transgender rules breach rights to free speech, court told. Official police guidance on recording hate incidents against transgender people imposes a substantial chilling effect on freedom of expression, the High Court has been told by lawyers representing a former officer. Harry Miller, who served with Humberside Police, was contacted by the force earlier this year after a complaint from a member of the public about allegedly transphobic comments he made on his Twitter account, Harry the Owl. Another officer told Miller he had not committed a crime, but his tweeting was being recorded as a hate incident under the College of Policing's guidelines on hate crime, the High Court in London heard. The guidance defines a hate incident as any non-crime incident which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by a hostility or prejudice against a person who is transgender or perceived to be transgender. Miller launched legal action against the College of Policing, the professional body for the police service in England and Wales, and Humberside Police. It's the second high-profile case being heard this week in London involving a clash between free speech and trans rights. So it should be noted that Miller became well known earlier this year for retweeting a limerick about trans people. That's kind of where all of this came from, and since then it's kind of snowballed. Ultimately, I wish them support in this. I think that you should be allowed to discuss trans issues online without a crime or hate incident being recorded against you. I think it's bizarre that what even happened to Harry earlier in the year, that just seems to be a thing which is accepted, and the police seem to think that it's part of what they're allowed to do. What I would be interested in knowing when it comes to Fair Cop, though, is whether they would want to extend this to anything else, or are they only concerned about hate incidents being recorded when it comes to the discussion of trans issues? Because if it is that, and they only want special exemptions just for them to talk about what they want, but it wouldn't matter if it was to impact other people, that might not necessarily sit right with me. For example, if someone was to say something that the gender critical movement didn't like and they thought was hateful, that was reported to the police and it was recorded as a hate incident, would Fair Cop think that was okay? I mean, that's just a hypothetical question because I don't think that's ever happened, but I just kind of wanted to put the question out there. Ultimately, I think that this is a fight which needs to be done because we're finding more and more people being censored online. As I mentioned, Posie Parker earlier, but you even get trans people talking about trans issues and they get yeeted off the likes of Twitter. And you had Miranda Yardley earlier this year, love him or hate him, and he got, that went to the police as well. And that actually went through into court. And all of this is just for talking about trans stuff. I can't help but feel that despite this being a reflection of some of the, one of the smallest groups out there, really, it's becoming at the forefront of the fight for free speech. Because there seems to be a bizarre line here where we can't cross it. And it seems to be declared by a number of hardline activists that just seem to have good links to people in power. I think it's important what Harry is doing, and I wish him all the support. But what are your thoughts on the stories I've covered this week? Is there anything in particular I've missed out? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. I am sorry that there wasn't a Trans Stupid last week. However, I hope you all enjoyed the Baby Seal Spectacular. And if you guys like that enough, maybe there might be one in the future. And it might feature this chap. Look at him. Look at him. Look, he is trying to get over the ice and failing. But anyway, if you enjoy what I do, please be sure to like and subscribe. You can also support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, and you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram as well. Thank you once again, and I'll see you all next time. And a special thanks to Alex Meadows, Casey Adolphson, Dan Norman, Finella Cooney, James C. George, Kim Vandry, Latin Creature, Liz Udesu, Nova B, Ricardo Jose, Rose Hitnall, Stephen, The Poor of Rizzo, Traname Girl, Green Potato Chips, Laisha, James Dorans, James UK, Moy Felicita, Kim Vandry, Sarah, and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.